Just a little more!
I think I can get you back on the road.
I want to see you again.
The day I met Eleanor Whitmore.
The day I met Eleanor Whitmore, I never imagined a broken wagon in the middle of a storm would change the course of my life. The rain had started just after I finished delivering a load of hay to a neighboring ranch. By the time I turned my old pickup onto the dirt road leading home, the Texas sky had become almost black. Thunder rolled across the hills, lightning flashed in the distance, and the road quickly turned into a river of thick mud. Most people would have hurried home. So would I. Then I saw the wagon. It was sitting at an awkward angle near the side of the road, one wheel buried deep in the mud, while two frightened horses struggled against their harnesses. A woman stood beside them, soaked by the rain, doing everything she could to calm them. As I drove closer, I recognized her immediately. Eleanor Whitmore, the owner of the largest ranch in the county, the kind of woman everyone seemed to know, but very few actually knew. She looked nothing like the confident businesswoman people talked about. She looked exhausted, cold, and desperate. She needed to reach town before nightfall, but the wagon wasn't going anywhere. I pulled over, grabbed my toolbox, and walked through the rain without saying much. The axle had cracked after hitting a hidden rut beneath the mud. Most people would have needed a blacksmith. We didn't have time for that. Using a few simple tools, a length of hardwood from a nearby fence post, and an old iron brace I carried in my truck, I managed to reinforce the damaged axle well enough to get the wagon moving again. When I finally stepped back, soaked from head to toe, Eleanor climbed aboard and gently urged the horses forward. The wagon rolled perfectly. She looked at me for a long moment through the falling rain. Then, with a smile I'll never forget, she quietly said, "I want to see you again." Before I could answer, she drove away into the storm. I watched the wagon disappear down the muddy road, convinced that a man like me would never cross paths with a woman like Eleanor Whitmore again. I couldn't have been more wrong. My name is Jacob Miller. I'm 42 years old, and if there's one thing I've learned after all these years, it's that life rarely follows the plans we make. I'm a cowboy. Not because it's a title, because it's the only life I've ever known. Every morning before the sun rises over the Texas hills, I'm already outside feeding horses, checking fences, repairing equipment, and doing whatever it takes to keep my little ranch alive. It's not much compared to the Whitmore Ranch. Just a modest piece of land, an old wooden barn, a handful of horses, a few cattle, and a house that's seen better days. The roof leaks whenever the rain comes hard. The tractor only starts when it feels like cooperating. And some months, the bills arrive faster than the money. There were nights when I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at unpaid invoices, wondering how much longer I could keep everything together. But every time those thoughts crept into my mind, I'd hear the front door open. Then I'd hear running footsteps. Dad, Emma, my little girl, 8 years old, the reason I never gave up. Emma loved horses more than anything else in the world. She knew every horse on our ranch by name. She brushed them, talked to them, read storybooks beside the paddock as though the horses were listening. But there was one place she dreamed about more than anywhere else. The Whitmore Ranch. Whenever people in town talked about its endless pastures, magnificent stables, or famous breeding horses, Emma's eyes lit up. "Do you think we'll ever see it, Dad?" I'd smile every time. Maybe someday. The truth was, I never thought someday would actually come. Life had become much quieter after Sarah died. My wife had a way of filling every room with warmth. She could make even the hardest day feel lighter with nothing more than a smile. Losing her changed everything. The ranch became quieter. Our home felt emptier. Emma tried to be brave, but I could see how much she missed her mother. The night before Sarah passed away, she reached for my hand as we sat beside her hospital bed. Her voice was weak, almost a whisper, but every word stayed with me. "Jacob." I squeezed her hand. She smiled gently. Kindness always comes back. At first I thought she was talking about life in general. Years later I realized she was giving me one last lesson. Never help someone because you expect something in return. Help because it's the right thing to do. That became the way I tried to live. If a neighbor's fence collapsed, I helped rebuild it. If someone's horse escaped, I helped bring it home. If a stranger needed a hand on the side of the road, I stopped, not because I expected payment, because Sarah would have done the same. That's exactly why I never hesitated when I saw Eleanor's wagon stranded in the middle of that storm. To me, she wasn't the richest ranch owner in Texas. She was simply someone who needed help. I fixed the wagon, wished her well, and drove home believing that would be the end of the story. I had no idea that one simple act of kindness, one muddy road, one broken wagon, was about to change not only my life, but Emma's as well. Sometimes Sarah was right. Kindness really does find its way back. I just never imagined the road it would take to return to me. 3 days after I helped Eleanor on that rain-soaked road, I found an envelope tucked inside my mailbox. At first I assumed it was another bill. Around my ranch, that was usually a safe guess. But when I turned it over, I saw an elegant wax seal stamped with a familiar brand. Whitmore Ranch. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. Not from an assistant, not from a lawyer, from Eleanor herself. She thanked me again for stopping in the storm and helping a complete stranger without asking for a single dollar in return. Then, near the bottom of the page, she wrote something I hadn't expected. "I'd like you and Emma to visit the Whitmore Ranch this Saturday." I read the sentence twice, then a third time. According to the letter, the invitation wasn't only Eleanor's idea. Her 8-year-old son, Noah, had listened to the story of the cowboy who repaired a broken wagon in the middle of a thunderstorm and refused any reward. Apparently, he couldn't stop asking questions about me. What kind of cowboy fixes things in the rain just to help someone? What was his daughter like? Can I meet them? I smiled without realizing it. Emma nearly jumped with excitement when I showed her the invitation. "We're really going? If that's what you want." She wrapped her arms around me before I even finished the sentence. On Saturday morning, we drove through the massive entrance gates of the Whitmore Ranch. Emma pressed her face against the truck window, completely amazed. The endless pastures, the beautiful white fences, the enormous horse barns, everything looked exactly like she had imagined, maybe even better. Eleanor welcomed us personally. This time there was no rain, no broken wagon, no urgency, only a warm smile. She introduced us to Noah, who stood quietly beside one of the paddocks, holding a small bucket of carrots. For a few seconds, both children simply looked at each other. I wondered whether the moment might feel awkward. Then Emma noticed the horse beside him. "Can I feed him?" Noah smiled. "He likes carrots." That was all it took. Within minutes they were laughing together, as if they had known each other for years. They walked through the stables, compared riding boots, argued about which horse was the fastest, laughed every time one of the curious colts nudged them looking for treats. Watching them together felt strangely familiar. Children never seemed to care about money, or social status, or family names. They only care whether someone is kind. While the kids explored the ranch, Eleanor and I followed at a slower pace. She apologized again for not properly thanking me that day on the road. I told her there was nothing to thank me for. I would have done the same for anyone. She looked at me for a moment. I know. There was something different in her expression. Not admiration, not gratitude, curiosity. As the afternoon passed, I noticed her watching me from time to time. Not when I was speaking, when I wasn't. She saw me helping Noah saddle a gentle mare before he even asked. She watched me kneel beside Emma to brush mud off her boots after she slipped near the creek. She noticed I always made sure the children crossed fences safely before I climbed over myself. Small things, the kind of things nobody usually pays attention to. Late that afternoon, Emma and Noah disappeared toward the pasture, chasing a pair of young foals while their laughter echoed across the valley. Eleanor stood beside me, watching them. Then she spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "You know," I turned toward her, "most men who come here spend the entire day trying to impress me." She smiled softly. "You spent the whole day making sure the children were happy." I didn't know how to answer that, because to me it wasn't something unusual. It was simply who I was. At that moment, I saw something change in Eleanor's eyes. For the first time in a very long while, she realized I was nothing like the men who usually surrounded her, and neither of us knew that simple realization was about to change everything. After that first visit, I thought it would be a long time before I saw Eleanor again. I was wrong. A few days later, she called, asking if I could take a look at one of the ranch's irrigation pumps. One of the mechanics had already spent 2 days trying to fix it without success, and the cattle pastures desperately needed water before another stretch of hot Texas weather. I drove over that same afternoon. The problem wasn't nearly as complicated as everyone thought. A cracked valve, a worn belt. Less than an hour later, the pump was running again. When I finished, Eleanor reached into her purse. I raised my hand before she could say anything. "It's fine." She looked confused. "You spent your afternoon helping us." "I know. You should be paid." I smiled. "Maybe next time." That next time came sooner than either of us expected. A horse injured its leg after breaking through an old fence. I helped repair the enclosure. Then a water trough collapsed. I fixed that, too. 1 week later, several barn doors refused to close after a windstorm. By then, the ranch hands had already started calling me before anyone else. Not because I worked there, because they knew I'd show up. Some afternoons I'd spend hours beside the employees repairing equipment, stacking hay, or helping calm nervous horses during storms. Nobody had to ask twice. And somehow, every time Eleanor offered to pay me extra, my answer stayed the same. "You already invited Emma to spend time here. That's more than enough." She never argued, but I noticed she stopped offering money quite as often. Instead, she'd bring 2 glasses of iced tea out to the barn while I worked. Sometimes we'd sit on overturned feed buckets for a few quiet minutes before returning to our day. The conversations were never dramatic. We talked about horses, weather, fences, Emma's latest adventures, Noah's growing confidence, simple things, real things. Meanwhile, Emma and Noah became almost impossible to separate. If one of them was at the stables, the other wasn't far away. They built obstacle courses for the horses, invented games around the ranch, spent entire afternoons exploring creeks and wooded trails while staying just close enough that we could keep an eye on them. More than once I caught Noah copying things I did without even realizing it. The way I adjusted a saddle, the way I spoke softly to frightened horses, even the habit of removing my hat whenever we entered the house. One afternoon, while we were repairing a section of fence together, he looked up at me. "Mr. Jacob." "You can just call me Jacob." He smiled. "Will you teach me how to fix fences like this?" I handed him the hammer. "Only if you're willing to hit your thumb a few times first." He laughed. "So did you. More times than I'll ever admit." By the end of the afternoon, he had driven his very first nail straight into the post. He looked prouder than if he'd won a rodeo. Eleanor watched the entire moment from the porch. I could see the emotion in her face, not because Noah had learned to repair a fence, because she hadn't seen him admire another adult like that since his father passed away. As the weeks turned into months, our evenings quietly changed, too. Instead of eating alone in separate houses, we often shared simple dinners on the Whitmore Ranch porch. Nothing fancy. Homemade stew, fresh biscuits, sweet tea, the children telling stories over one another while the horses grazed peacefully beyond the fence. Sometimes, after dinner, we'd saddle 4 horses and ride together until sunset. Emma always tried to race ahead. Noah insisted he could catch her. Neither ever succeeded. Their laughter echoed across the open fields, while Eleanor and I followed behind at a slower pace. One evening she looked toward the children and smiled. "They've become family." I looked at Emma helping Noah adjust his saddle, then back at Eleanor. "So have we." The words escaped before I had time to think. Neither of us said anything afterward. We simply kept riding beneath the golden Texas sky. What I didn't realize was that we weren't the only ones watching. From the balcony of the ranch office, Victor Kane stood silently observing everything, and judging by the look on his face, he had just realized something that frightened him more than losing the ranch. Eleanor Whitmore was beginning to change, and he knew exactly who was responsible. I should have realized sooner that not everyone was happy to see me spending time at the Whitmore Ranch. The closer Eleanor and I became, the more uncomfortable Victor Kane seemed whenever I was around. At first he hid it well, a sarcastic comment here, a forced smile there, the kind of man who shakes your hand while hoping you'll disappear the next morning. But eventually, he stopped pretending. The rumors started quietly. According to Victor, I hadn't helped Eleanor during the storm out of kindness. I'd planned the whole thing. He claimed I'd been looking for a way into the Whitmore Ranch from the very beginning. By the end of the week, people in town were whispering that I was trying to marry the richest woman in the county. Others claimed I had already convinced her to put my name on part of the ranch. I ignored every one of them. I've learned something over the years. Truth doesn't become a lie just because enough people repeat the same rumor. Unfortunately, Victor wasn't finished. One afternoon, Eleanor asked me to stop by the ranch office. The moment I walked inside, I knew something was wrong. Several envelopes were spread across her desk. She looked disappointed, almost hurt. Without saying a word, she handed me a stack of papers. According to those documents, several ranch employees claimed I had privately asked them for money in exchange for helping repair equipment and care for the horses. There were handwritten statements, payment records, even signed receipts. At first glance, everything looked convincing. Too convincing. I read every page carefully. Then I noticed something strange. All the signatures had been written with the same type of ink, the same pressure, the same handwriting rhythm. Years ago, before returning to ranch life, I spent nearly 10 years serving as a Texas Ranger. Investigating fraud taught me that people usually focus on the obvious. Experienced investigators look at the details nobody else notices. I asked Eleanor one question. Did every one of these employees sign these papers today? She frowned. I don't know. I think we should ask them. The next morning, we spoke to the ranch hands one by one. The first employee looked confused. I never signed anything. The second admitted Victor had asked him to sign what he described as routine payroll paperwork. The third became nervous before finally telling the truth. Victor had offered him money, not to lie, just to sign blank sheets of paper. He never imagined those signatures would later appear beneath completely different statements. That confession changed everything. From that moment on, the entire story began falling apart. With permission from Eleanor, I examined the ranch office records, old invoices, security logs, payroll files, visitor records. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Victor had accessed administrative files late at night on multiple occasions. Several financial records had been copied. Documents had been altered. Even security footage from one evening had mysteriously disappeared. Fortunately for Victor, he wasn't as careful as he believed. One of the backup servers automatically stored copies of every deleted file, including the footage showing him entering the records room after everyone else had gone home. When we recovered the video, there was no longer any doubt. The forged accusations, the fake receipts, the false witness statements, every road led back to the same man, Victor Kane. His plan had never really been about me. I was simply the easiest target. If Eleanor stopped trusting me, she'd be alone again, and an isolated ranch owner is much easier to manipulate than one surrounded by people who genuinely care about her. That afternoon, Eleanor looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry I even questioned you." I smiled gently. "You didn't. You questioned the evidence. That's exactly what you were supposed to do." She lowered her head. I almost lost someone important because I listened to the wrong person. Neither of us noticed how much those words truly meant. Not yet. As the sun began setting behind the Whitmore ranch, I walked outside and glanced at the calendar hanging near the stable entrance. Only one decision remained. I had done everything I came to do. Victor's lies were about to be exposed. The ranch would be safe again. And maybe it was finally time for me to go home. Neither Eleanor nor I realized that the truth would come out at the exact moment I decided to walk away from the one place that had quietly begun to feel like home. The meeting was held inside the main hall of the Whitmore Ranch. Every seat was occupied. Ranch foremen, accountants, lawyers, members of the Whitmore Family Trust, even employees who had worked alongside William Whitmore for decades, stood quietly against the walls, waiting to learn who would shape the ranch's future. The atmosphere felt heavier than any storm I'd ever ridden through. At the center of the room sat Victor Kane, perfectly dressed, perfectly calm, or at least he wanted everyone to believe he was. Eleanor opened the meeting with only a few words. This ranch was built on honesty. She looked around the room, and today, everyone deserves the truth. Then she nodded toward me. I walked to the front carrying a wooden box filled with documents I'd spent days organizing. Security reports, payroll records, bank statements, surveillance photographs, copies of deleted computer files. One by one, I placed them on the long conference table. Nobody interrupted. I began with the forged employee statements. Then I showed the original blank forms that Victor had convinced ranch hands to sign. Next came the financial records proving several payments had been made through companies secretly controlled by him. Finally, I played the recovered security footage. The room fell completely silent. The video clearly showed Victor entering the ranch office long after every employee had gone home. Minutes later, he walked out carrying confidential files. A handwriting specialist explained how the fake receipts had been created. The ranch accountant confirmed that the payment records had been altered. Then came the witnesses. One ranch hand admitted Victor had promised him a promotion if he signed paperwork, without asking questions. Another confessed he had been paid to spread rumors that I was secretly charging employees for repairs. Each testimony made Victor's position weaker. When he finally stood to defend himself, his confidence had disappeared. "They're lying." His voice no longer carried the certainty it once had. "They're all working together." No one answered, because no one needed to. The evidence spoke for itself. The chairman of the Whitmore Family Trust quietly reviewed the final documents before looking around the room. "I believe we've seen enough." A vote was called immediately. Every hand except Victor's was raised. Unanimously, he was removed from every management position connected to the Whitmore Ranch. The trust also voted to forward every document to the county sheriff for a criminal investigation into fraud, forgery, and financial misconduct. Victor looked around the room, searching for support. He found none. Without another word, he picked up his jacket and slowly walked toward the exit. The same employees who once greeted him with respect now stepped aside in complete silence. As the front door closed behind him, it felt as though a weight had finally been lifted from the ranch. People smiled. Some applauded quietly. Others simply embraced one another. William Whitmore's legacy was safe. The employees kept their jobs. The ranch would remain exactly where it belonged. With Eleanor, she walked over and hugged me without saying a word. She didn't have to. Some moments are too important for speeches. A few days later, life settled back into its familiar rhythm. The fences still needed repairs. The horses still demanded breakfast before sunrise. The wind still carried the smell of fresh hay across the fields. Everything looked peaceful again. And that's when I realized my work was finished. I'd come to the Whitmore Ranch because a broken wagon needed fixing. I stayed because people needed help. Now they no longer needed me. So before dawn the next morning, I loaded my toolbox into the back of my old pickup. Emma climbed into the passenger seat without asking many questions. She could tell by the suitcase behind the seat that we were going home. I took one last look across the Whitmore Ranch. The barns, the pastures, the porch where we'd shared so many quiet evenings. I smiled to myself. Sometimes helping someone means knowing when it's time to leave. I started the engine. The truck rolled slowly toward the front gate. I honestly believed that was the end of our story. Then, in my rearview mirror, I saw someone running down the long ranch driveway. It wasn't raining this time. The sky was perfectly clear, and Eleanor Whitmore was running toward me anyway. I had barely driven a mile from the Whitmore Ranch when I saw someone standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought another traveler needed help. Then I recognized her. Eleanor. I slowly brought my truck to a stop. The same stretch of road where we had first met stretched out before us. Only this time, there was no thunder, no pouring rain, no broken wagon trapped in the mud. The sky was clear. The evening sun painted the Texas hills in shades of gold, as though the land itself had decided our story deserved a different ending. I stepped out of the truck. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. We simply looked at one another. It reminded me of that first afternoon when I had walked toward her wagon carrying nothing more than a toolbox and the simple intention of helping a stranger. Eleanor smiled, a warm, genuine smile. Then she quietly said, "The first time we met, you fixed my wagon." I couldn't help smiling, too. "I remember." She laughed softly. I don't think I'll ever forget it. For a moment, she looked down at the dusty road beneath her boots. Then she took one slow step toward me. "I've been thinking about that day. So have I." She looked into my eyes. "Back then, I thought you repaired a broken wagon." She paused, but now I realize you repaired much more than that. I didn't know what to say, because deep down, I felt exactly the same. She took another step closer. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only honesty. "Today, She smiled through tears. I'm asking you not to leave. The words hung in the quiet evening air. Months earlier, I would have assumed she was asking me to stay because the ranch still needed help. But I knew better now. Victor was gone. The ranch was safe. The employees were secure. There was nothing left to repair, except the space we would leave in each other's lives if I drove away. I looked toward my old pickup, then back at Eleanor. You know, I smiled. When I stopped that day in the rain, I thought I was helping someone for a few minutes. She reached for my hand. You changed my life. I gently squeezed her hand. No, we changed each other's. Before either of us could say anything else, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the fields. We both turned. Emma and Noah came riding over the hill as fast as their horses could safely run. Emma was laughing so hard she could barely hold the reins. Noah waved both hands in the air. They finally reached us and jumped down from their horses almost at the same time. Emma wrapped her arms around me. Noah immediately hugged his mother. Then the two children looked at each other and smiled. I told you he wasn't leaving, Emma whispered. Noah grinned. I knew it. Watching them together, I realized something beautiful. Neither of them seemed surprised. Children often recognize the truth long before adults are willing to admit it. A few minutes later, we saddled the horses once more. This time, nobody was racing. Nobody was in a hurry. The four of us rode slowly along the same country road where a broken wagon had once brought two strangers together. The setting sun stretched long shadows across the Texas fields. A gentle breeze moved through the tall grass. Emma and Noah rode ahead, laughing as they pointed toward a small herd of wild deer crossing the valley. Eleanor guided her horse beside mine. Without saying a word, she reached over and took my hand. I looked at her. She smiled, and somehow everything felt exactly where it belonged. As we disappeared into the golden horizon, I found myself thinking back to that stormy afternoon months earlier. The broken axle, the pouring rain, the muddy road, the stranger who asked for nothing except a little help. The day I fixed her wagon, I thought I was only helping a stranger in the rain. I never imagined I was finding the road that would lead me home. If you had been riding that road in the rain, would you have stopped to help a stranger? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about kindness, family, second chances, and cowboys who never give up, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.